The chains were heavy, cold iron that bit into Elias Vane's wrists. But they were nothing compared to the weight of his failure. He was being dragged across the cobblestones of the royal courtyard, his physician's robes torn and stained with the mud of the dungeon. Above him, the sky was a weeping gray, matching the mood of a kingdom that had just lost its monarch. They didn't care that the king's illness was ancient, a rot that no medicine could cure. They only cared that Elias, the royal botanist and physician, had promised a miracle and delivered a corpse. High Inquisitor Corvus stood on the executioner's dais, his crimson robes stark against the gray stone. He held a handkerchief to his nose, as if the very scent of Elias offended him. "Treason," Corvus pronounced, his voice thin and sharp like a flaying knife. "You claimed knowledge of the old herbs. You claimed you could cheat death. But death has come, Elias, and now the abyss must be fed." The abyss. The word sent a shiver through the gathered crowd. It wasn't just a prison. It was a natural limestone sinkhole on the edge of the city, plunging deep into the earth. Legend said it connected to the old world, the ruins that Oakhaven was built upon. Legends also said something lived down there. A beast. A garbage disposal for the king's enemies. Elias was shoved to the edge of the pit. The smell rising from it was a mixture of sulfur and stagnant water. "Corvus!" Elias shouted, the desperation finally breaking his composure. "My research was sound. The toxin in the king's blood, it wasn't natural. You know what really killed him." Corvus didn't blink. He simply nodded to the guards. "Gravity," the Inquisitor smiled, "is the only cure you have left." A boot kicked the center of Elias's back. The world upended. There was a rush of wind, a scream that was ripped from his throat, and then the terrified silence of freefall. He tumbled into the dark, the light of the surface shrinking to a pinprick before vanishing entirely. He braced for impact, expecting death, but instead he hit water. Cold, oily, deep water. He plunged into the subterranean depths, the shock knocking the air from his lungs, marking the beginning of his sentence in the dark. Elias broke the surface, gasping, his lungs burning. The water was pitch black and smelled of rot. He flailed, his heavy boots threatening to drag him down, until his hand struck wet, slimy rock. He hauled himself onto a narrow ledge, coughing up brackish water. He was alive. But as his breathing slowed, the reality of his situation set in. He was in the abyss. There was no light down here, absolute zero visibility. He had to rely on his other senses. The air was thick and humid. The ground was slick with algae and bones. Small bones. Rats, perhaps, or previous prisoners. He fumbled in his pocket. His survival kit had been taken, but he still had a small vial of luciferin paste, a bioluminescent compound he used for studying nightshade. It was contraband, sewn into the lining of his tunic. He cracked the seal. A faint, ghostly blue light illuminated a 3-foot radius around him. "Put it out!" a voice hissed from the shadows. Elias spun around, nearly slipping back into the water. "Who's there?" "Put it out, you fool! She'll see you!" A hand, skeletal and filthy, grabbed Elias's wrist. The blue light revealed a man huddled in a crevice of the rock wall. He was naked, emaciated, his skin pale as a cave fish. But the most terrifying detail was his face. Where his eyes should have been, there were only scarred, empty sockets. "Harith?" Elias whispered, recognizing the voice of the former castle blacksmith who had vanished years ago. "Blind Harith?" "I am not Harith," the creature croaked. "I am just meat that hasn't spoiled yet." He clawed at Elias's tunic, trying to cover the blue light. "You must listen to the rules of the dark, physician.
The beast.
She is the queen of this deep. She smells the blood of the surface on you.
What is she?
Elias asked, his voice trembling. Old, Harith whispered. Older than the stone. She leaves us be, mostly. Takes one every moon to eat. But tonight is different. She is screaming. Not in anger, in pain. The rocks are vibrating with it. Harith leaned in close, his empty socket staring into Elias's soul. Listen to me closely. If you encounter her, do not look into her eyes when they glow. If the emerald fire meets your gaze, your blood will curdle into venom. You will die screaming. Stay in the dark, keep your head down, and pray she dies before she finds you. Elias left Harith shivering in his crevice. He couldn't stay there. The tide of the underground lake was rising, and instinct told him to find higher ground. He navigated the twisting limestone tunnels, the faint blue light of his vial barely cutting the oppressive gloom. The deeper he went, the more the atmosphere changed. The smell of rot and sewage faded, replaced by a strange, metallic scent. Copper and musk. It smelled like a reptile house, but magnified 1,000 times. And then there was the sound. Harith had said the rocks were vibrating, and he was right. It wasn't a roar. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming that Elias felt in his teeth. Thump, drag, hiss. It sounded like a mountain dragging itself across the floor. Elias entered a massive cavern. The ceiling was lost in darkness, but the acoustics were vast. He froze. The silence here was heavy, pregnant with threat. But beneath the silence, he heard it, a sound that stopped his heart. It was a whimper, a high-pitched, straining sound of agony. It didn't sound like a monster hunting prey. It sounded like suffering. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound of massive claws digging into stone echoed from the far side of the cavern. Elias extinguished his light, plunging himself into total darkness. He held his breath. I can smell your fear, a voice whispered. It wasn't spoken. It was projected directly into his mind, slippery and cold. It wasn't a human voice. It was layered, sibilant, like a snake speaking through a woman's throat. You are the physician, the voice echoed in his skull. The one who smells of herbs and death. Elias backed up, his boot crunching on loose shale. The noise was like a gunshot. Do not run, the voice groaned, the mental projection fraying with evident pain. I require aid. From the darkness ahead, a heavy, wet sound echoed, like a sack of wet leather hitting the floor. Then, the rhythmic scratching of claws, desperate and frantic. Elias realized with a jolt that the beast wasn't stalking him. She was writhing. She was incapacitated. Help me, the voice hissed, or I will crush the life from you just to stop the pain. Elias hesitated, his hand hovering over the vial of bioluminescent paste. The voice in his head was desperate, but Harith's warning screamed in his memory, do not look into the emerald fire. Yet, the sound of suffering was undeniable. It wasn't the chuffing of a predator preparing to strike. It was the ragged, rhythmic breathing of something fighting for its life. He made a choice. He squeezed the vial, smearing the glowing blue paste onto the rock wall to create a dim, ambient light. He kept his gaze strictly on the floor, watching the shadows stretch and warp. I am going to approach, Elias said, his voice echoing in the vastness. I am a physician. If you are hurt, I can help. He stepped forward, his boots splashing in shallow water. As he drew closer, the blue light revealed the scale of the creature. He saw coils, massive, thick as ancient tree trunks, covered in scales that shimmered like wet emeralds even in the dim light. They were thrashing weakly, grinding against the limestone. He followed the coils up, forcing his eyes to stay low. He saw a torso. Pale, human skin, sleek and muscled, transitioning seamlessly into the serpent body at the hips. Bands of tarnished gold were clamped around her wrists, ancient and etched with runes. "Look at me," the voice commanded, weaker now. Elias squeezed his eyes shut. "I cannot. I was told, your gaze is death." "My gaze is protection," the voice hissed, tinged with irony. "But I will dim the fire. Look, physician. See what the abyss holds." Elias opened his eyes, risking a glance upward. He didn't see a monster. He saw a face of terrifying, regal beauty, framed by a mane of dark, wet hair. Her eyes indeed were glowing, 2 vertical slits of molten green light, but they were half-lidded, clouded with exhaustion. She wasn't hunting him. She was looking at him with a mixture of imperious command and absolute terror. Lysandra, the serpent matriarch, was not dying of a wound. She was in labor, and from the way her massive tail was knotted in spasms, Elias knew something was terribly wrong. The realization hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. The king had died because Elias couldn't solve a biological riddle, and now, in the bowels of the earth, he was staring at another impossible medical crisis. "The child," Lysandra gasped, her telepathic voice fracturing into jagged shards of pain. "It does not move. It is stuck." Elias moved without thinking, his physician's instinct overriding his fear of the apex predator. He waded into the water, coming to stand beside the massive junction where her human form met the serpent tail. She was burning up, her skin radiating a fever heat that he could feel through his damp clothes. "I need to touch you," Elias said, holding up his hands. "I need to turn the infant. If I don't, the strain will kill you both." Lysandra let out a low, vibrating growl that shook dust from the ceiling. It was a sound of instinctual defense, a warning that she could snap him in half before he blinked. But the growl trailed off into a whimper. She slumped back against the cave wall, exposing her vulnerability. "Do it," she projected. "But if you harm it, I will melt the flesh from your bones." Elias went to work. The anatomy was alien, yet familiar enough. He could feel the infant's position through the thick muscle of her abdomen. It was a breech, twisted at a dangerous angle. He had no instruments, no anesthesia, only his hands, and his terrifying proximity to a creature that could kill him by accident. The crisis escalated. Lysandra's strength began to fail. Her glowing eyes flickered and dimmed, the cave plunging into near-total darkness. "Stay with me," Elias shouted, pressing his hands against the scales. "You have to push! Now, Lysandra, push!" The cavern groaned as she summoned the last of her strength. The ancient stones cracked under the pressure of her coils tightening. Elias felt the shift, a sudden, slick movement beneath his hands. The obstruction cleared. A sharp, piercing cry tore through the silence of the abyss. It wasn't the hiss of a snake, nor the wail of a human infant. It was a harmonic chord, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very crystals embedded in the cavern walls. Elias fell back, breathless, his hands slick with fluids. Resting in the curve of the Serpent Queen's tail was the child. He scrambled to clear the infant's airways, and as he wiped the birthing call from its face, he froze. He had expected a serpent. He had expected a monster. He was holding a boy. The infant had pale human skin, but down his spine ran a ridge of delicate, soft emerald scales. His fingernails were sharp, tiny claws. And when the baby opened its eyes, They weren't the milky blue of a newborn human. They were bright, vertical slit gold, identical to his mother's. A hybrid. Elias stared in awe. This wasn't just a biological anomaly. This was impossible. A bridge between two species that had been at war for centuries. A massive shadow moved over him. Elias flinched, remembering the rule, remembering the threat. He looked up, expecting the venomous gaze of the mother protecting her young. Lysandra was looming over him, her face inches from his. But her eyes were not burning with the killing light. They were soft, swimming with tears that looked like liquid mercury. She reached out a massive, clawed hand and gently, so gently it broke Elias's heart, brushed a lock of wet hair from his forehead. "You stayed," she whispered in his mind, the voice no longer cold, but warm and resonating with a deep, ancient gratitude. "You did not run." She looked at the baby in Elias's arms, then back at the disgraced physician. The barrier between predator and prey had dissolved. In the darkness of the pit, a pact had been forged in blood and life. "His name is Kaelen," she projected, "and he is the key. You must keep him safe, Elias Vane, for if he dies, the old world dies with him." Time in the abyss did not move by the sun or the moon. It was measured in the rhythmic dripping of the limestone and the steady, harmonic breathing of the child. Days turned into weeks, and the terror that had defined Elias's descent slowly transmuted into a strange domestic quiet. The pit, once a grave, had become a sanctuary. Elias Vane, the soft-handed scholar of the royal court, hardened. In the pitch black, he learned to navigate the damp, uneven floor by the echo of his own footsteps. He learned that the bioluminescent fungi growing near the water's edge were not poison, but a sweet, starchy sustenance. He became the provider of comfort, crushing cave moss into salves for Lysandra's healing flesh, while she became the provider of security. No other thing dared approach their alcove. The giant centipedes and blind rats that scuttled in the periphery kept a terrified distance, repelled by the pheromones of the apex predator. Elias slept soundly for the first time in years, curled against the massive warm flank of the Serpent Queen, with the hybrid infant sleeping between them.
Kaelen grew at an unnatural rate. The boy did not cry for milk like a human infant. He fed on the nutrient-rich paste Elias synthesized from the fungi and the regurgitated, pre-digested offerings from Lysandra, a primal, avian way of feeding that Elias found he could not judge. The child's skin toughened, the emerald scales along his spine shimmering with their own faint internal light. One evening, as Elias sat polishing a piece of driftwood he had fashioned into a splint, he watched Lysandra. She was coiled around the sleeping boy, her terrifying face softened in repose. She wasn't the monster the legends spoke of. She was fiercely protective, intelligent, and, in her own way, lonely. Elias realized with a heavy heart that he had stopped looking for a way out. Up there, under the gray sky of Oakhaven, he was a traitor, a failure, a man sentenced to death by a cruel Inquisitor. Down here, in the crushing dark, he was necessary. He was a father. He was alive. He looked at the distant shaft of light far above, the executioner's drop. It was a pinprick of white in a world of black. He knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that the silence couldn't last. The kingdom above didn't forget its debts, and he knew that when they came back, it wouldn't be to feed the beast. It would be to hunt her. The sanctuary Elias and Lysandra had forged in the dark was a fragile thing, built on silence and shadows. For weeks, the abyss had been their world. Elias had learned to grind cave moss into a poultice for Lysandra's healing scales, and she, in turn, had taught him which subterranean streams were poison and which were pure. They revolved around the child, Kaelen, whose cries were soft, harmonic chimes that seemed to calm the very tremors of the earth.
But peace in the kingdom of Oakhaven was a surface lie, and gravity always demands its due. The silence broke not with a roar, but with the squeal of rusted iron. Far above, the executioner's lift, unused for years, began to descend.
It carried not a prisoner, but a platoon of torch-bearing soldiers, descending like sparks falling into a barrel of oil. The light from their torches violated the gloom, sending the cave-dwellers skittering into the cracks. Elias stood his ground near the nesting pool, the baby strapped to his chest in a sling made from his tattered robes. Lysandra coiled around them, a living wall of emerald muscle and deadly potential. She was healed now, her strength returning, but she was still one against many. The lift hit the cavern floor with a heavy thud. High Inquisitor Corvus stepped out, flanked by men in heavy plate armor carrying alchemical flamethrowers. He didn't look at the Serpent Queen. His gaze locked instantly on the bundle against Elias's chest. "I told the council the beast was dead," Corvus sneered, his voice amplified by the cavern acoustics. "But my spies heard singing in the deep. Not the wailing of a ghost, but the cry of a child." He took a step forward, the firelight dancing in his cruel eyes. "Surrender the abomination, physician. I need its blood to ensure the dynasty lasts another 1,000 years. Give it to me, and I will grant you a quick death. Refuse, and I will burn this pit until the air itself turns to ash." Lysandra hissed, her hood flaring, casting a shadow that swallowed the Inquisitor's light. But Elias felt her fear, not for herself, but for Kaelen. The flamethrowers were primed. They were trapped. The first jet of liquid fire arced across the cavern, sizzling against the wet limestone. Lysandra moved with terrifying speed, her tail whipping out to smash the soldier aside, sending him and his tank tumbling into the dark water. But there were too many of them. Another stream of fire caught the edge of her nesting moss, and the cavern began to fill with choking black smoke. "Burn them out!" Corvus screamed, retreating behind a wall of shields. "Spare the child! Kill the rest!" Elias retreated deeper into the temple ruins, coughing, his hand cupped over Kaelen's head. The baby began to cry, that strange, resonant sound that vibrated in Elias's teeth. Above them, the ancient crystals embedded in the ceiling began to hum in response. Lysandra was holding the line, a whirlwind of claws and scales, but the fire was driving her back. She couldn't get close enough to strike Corvus without exposing the baby to the flames. "Elias!" her voice projected into his mind, sharp and frantic. "The river! You must take him to the river!" "We can't leave you!" Elias shouted over the roar of the fire. "Go! I will collapse the entrance!" Elias looked at the crystals glowing brighter with every cry Kaelen let out. He realized then what the baby was. He wasn't just a key to a door. He was a living tuning fork for the city's defense systems. "No," Elias growled. He didn't run. Instead, he stepped onto the central dais and pinched the baby's foot, just enough to elicit a wail of pure, piercing volume. The sound hit the crystals. The cavern shook violently. From the shadows of the ceiling, the stalactites detached. They weren't rocks. They were stone guardians, massive, mechanized serpents carved by the ancients, dormant for centuries, now awakened by the cry of their heir. They fell upon Corvus's men like hammers of God. Stone crushed armor, the floor fractured. The Inquisitor's scream was cut short as the ground beneath him gave way, dropping him into the churning depths of the lower aquifer. The soldiers broke and fled, their fires extinguished by the sheer chaos of the awakening temple. The dust settled slowly. The stone guardians, their duty done, coiled back into the shadows, becoming indistinguishable from the rock once more. The only sound left was the rushing of the underground river, now fully exposed by the fractured floor. Elias sat on the edge of the subterranean bank, exhausted, soot-stained, rocking the now quiet Kaelen. He looked up as Lysandra approached. She moved slowly, her scales scorched in places, but alive.
She didn't loom over him this time. She lowered her massive body until her face was level with his. "You possess a madness, Elias Vane," she said. Elias looked up, startled. The voice hadn't echoed in his head. It had come from her throat. It was rasping, unused to human speech, but undeniable. You can speak?" "I have not had a reason to speak the tongue of men for 300 years, she replied, her golden eyes softening as she looked at the child. "But the world has changed tonight. The barrier is broken." She looked toward the dark, rushing water of the river. It flowed fast, heading deep into the unknown veins of the earth, far away from the kingdom of Oakhaven and its cruel laws. "The river leads to the deep roads," Lysandra said, extending a hand to him, not a claw, but a hand. "To the sunless sea, where my people sleep. Kaelen has awakened the guardians. He will wake the kingdom." She paused, looking at Elias with a question that didn't need to be asked. He could try to climb back up to the surface, to a life of hiding and disgrace. Or he could step into the water. Elias stood up. He adjusted the sling, securing the hybrid child against his heart. He took the Serpent Queen's hand. It was cool to the touch, alien and strong. "Lead the way," Elias said. Together, the disgraced physician, the ancient monster, and the child who bridged their worlds stepped into the current, vanishing into the dark, to build a new empire.